At 8:17 a.m., 12 Americans were already dead. A concrete bunker had pinned down 160 men for 4 hours. Artillery couldn't touch it. Frontal assaults only fed it bodies. Then, a 21-year-old factory worker from Chicago stopped trying to destroy the pillbox and decided to outthink the men inside it. With one grenade and a trap built on human instinct, he forced the enemy to choose between two exits and turned both into death. By mid-morning on February 13th, 1945, Company A of the 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment was no longer advancing. They were bleeding in place. Fort William McKinley rose on elevated ground south of Manila, a maze of reinforced concrete pillboxes connected by overlapping fields of fire. 11 of those positions had already been destroyed through crawling assaults, suppressive fire, and grenades forced through narrow firing ports. Each success had cost time, ammunition, and lives. The 12th pillbox was different. It sat higher than the rest, built on a solid concrete foundation, its twin heavy machine guns covering every approach route with geometric precision. Anyone moving from the north, east, or south entered a kill zone 200 yards deep. The guns did not need to search for targets. The terrain funneled men directly into their sights. At 10:50 a.m., Lieutenant Morrison ordered a squad-sized assault. 8 men rose and moved forward. The machine guns opened fire within seconds. 3 men fell almost immediately. 2 more were hit while trying to pull the wounded back. The survivors crawled away under fire. 5 casualties. No damage to the bunker. A second attempt followed 40 minutes later. This time, a BAR team provided suppressive fire while smoke grenades rolled forward to mask the advance. For half a minute, it worked. Then the wind shifted. The smoke thinned, the silhouettes appeared, and the machine guns cut through them with mechanical calm. The BAR gunner was killed. 2 riflemen died where they stood. 3 more were wounded. By noon, 12 Americans were dead in front of a single position that refused to fall. Artillery was ruled out. The bunker was too close to friendly lines. A flanking maneuver was impossible. Even without its neighboring pillboxes, the angles still worked. The geometry still killed. Major Henry Burgess arrived and studied the position through binoculars, reinforced concrete, narrow firing ports, coordinated arcs of fire. Every option led to more casualties. Waiting for reinforcements would delay the division's advance. For hours, maybe days. The Japanese crew inside the bunker understood this. They fired intermittently, not to hit targets, but to remind Company A that they were still trapped. From a shell crater 100 yards away, Private First Class Manuel Perez Jr. watched in silence. He did not study the guns. He did not study the firing ports. He watched the back of the bunker, the ground everyone else had ignored, waiting for something the geometry demanded but doctrine never mentioned. By early afternoon, the battlefield had settled into a dangerous quiet. The machine guns fired only in short bursts now, not to kill, but to apply pressure. Each snap of a round into dirt or tree bark reminded Company A that the pillbox was still alive. Men stayed low, pressed into shallow depressions, conserving water and ammunition while the sun climbed higher. The heat was heavy, the air thick, and the smell of cordite hung over the ground. Perez lay in a shell crater southeast of the bunker, unmoving. While officers studied firing ports and distances, he studied behavior. A pillbox was not just concrete and guns. It was a system. Men fired from the front, but they did not live there. They ate, slept, and moved through tunnels. If the bunker existed, it had to breathe somewhere. After nearly 20 minutes of watching, Perez saw movement where no one else was looking. 40 yards behind the pillbox, partially hidden by brush, a dark opening broke the earth. A tunnel exit. Not large, not reinforced, but positioned exactly where it needed to be. It connected the fighting position to the rear trench line. It was an escape route. The geometry of the fight shifted instantly in his mind. A grenade through the firing port would not just kill men inside, it would force the survivors to flee. And under pressure, Soldiers do not choose the safest option. They choose the nearest one. The tunnel was close. The tunnel was familiar. The tunnel was predictable. Perez did not ask permission. He did not signal his plan. He began moving at 1,500 hours, low crawling through undergrowth, his M1 Garand cradled across his arms, grenades knocking softly against his web gear. He advanced during machine gun bursts and froze during silence, timing his movement to the rhythm of the enemy's fire. 4 Japanese soldiers spotted him from a secondary trench to the south and opened fire. Perez rolled, rose to one knee, and fired with controlled precision. 4 shots. 4 men fell. He reloaded by instinct and continued forward without pausing to check them. By 15:12, he was 20 yards from the pillbox. He could hear voices inside, sharp and urgent. He selected a grenade, pulled the pin, held the safety lever, and counted. At 1,517, he threw it through the firing port. The sound inside changed instantly. Shouts, movement, panic. The explosion came seconds later, amplified by concrete, turning the interior into a pressure chamber of steel fragments and overpressure. Perez did not wait to see the result. He was already moving, sprinting in a wide arc toward the tunnel exit, racing the men inside to the place he knew they would choose. Perez hit the ground near the tunnel exit seconds after the grenade detonated. He lay prone, rifle shouldered, muzzle fixed on the dark opening in the earth. He did not rush. He did not adjust his position. He waited. Inside the tunnel, boots pounded against packed dirt. Men were running, not coordinating, not communicating, driven by instinct and fear. The grenade had done its real work before it ever exploded. It had forced a decision. Stay and die, or run and survive. The first Japanese soldier burst from the tunnel, silhouetted for a fraction of a second against the darkness behind him. Perez fired once. The man collapsed in the dirt. A second followed almost immediately. 1 shot. Down. Then a third. Then a fourth. Each man emerged alone, spaced by seconds, exactly as panic dictated. The Garand's clip ejected with its metallic ping. Perez reloaded without looking, hands moving from repetition burned into muscle memory. He stayed locked on the opening, breathing slow, sight picture steady. The tunnel kept producing targets. 5th man, 6th, 7th, 8th. Each time the same sequence: appear, fire, fall. When the firing stopped, the silence felt heavier than the noise had been. Perez waited 30 seconds, counting, listening. Nothing moved. 8 bodies lay stacked in front of the tunnel, blood darkening the dirt. He rose and advanced toward the pillbox itself. Smoke still drifted from the firing ports. Inside, someone was alive. A Japanese soldier stumbled into the entrance holding an empty rifle and hurled it like a spear. The bayonet struck Perez's Garand, knocking it from his hands. Both men dove for weapons. Perez reached a dropped Type 99 rifle first. The action was unfamiliar, stiff, but it worked. 2 wounded soldiers emerged from the bunker with pistols. Perez chambered a round and fired. 1 fell. He worked the bolt again. The second fell. He recovered his Garand and entered the pillbox. The interior was shattered. Bodies torn by blast pressure lay against the walls. Ammunition belts hung loose from silent machine guns. 3 Japanese soldiers remained alive, all wounded. Perez moved through them with the buttstock and bayonet, finishing the fight at arm's length. When he stepped back outside, the twin machine guns that had pinned down Company A for 4 hours were silent. The geometry was broken. The trap had closed. By the time Perez emerged from the pillbox, Company A was already moving. Men who had spent the entire day pinned to the ground rose cautiously, then with growing confidence, advancing past the position that had killed their friends and stopped them cold. The ground around the bunker was littered with spent casings, shattered concrete, and bodies that marked where the advance had failed again and again. Now there was no fire, no warning bursts, just silence. Lieutenant Morrison reached Perez first. He entered the bunker, counted the dead inside, then walked back to the tunnel exit and counted again. 10 bodies in the pillbox. 8 at the tunnel. The men who had died earlier on the approach were excluded. The final tally for the position stood at 18 confirmed kills. 1 soldier, 4 minutes, a single grenade, and a plan. Major Burgess arrived shortly after. He questioned Perez carefully, step by step, tracing the route of his approach, the grenade throw, the sprint to the tunnel, the kill zone he had created without orders or coordination. Burgess wrote everything down. He understood what had happened. This was not reckless bravery. It was applied logic under fire. By 1645 hours, Fort McKinley's perimeter was secured. The division advanced through the breach at 1,730. The next objective, Nichols Field, fell within 6 hours. What had been projected as a 3-day operation collapsed into a single afternoon. The cost in American lives stopped climbing the moment those machine guns went quiet. The paperwork did not keep pace with the result. A Silver Star recommendation was drafted and rejected. The quota had been filled. Burgess ignored the refusal. He escalated the action directly to a Medal of Honor citation, returning to the battlefield himself to measure distances, photograph positions, and gather sworn statements. He treated the fight the way Perez had treated the pillbox. Methodically, precisely, without accepting the first answer. Perez never knew any of this. He was reassigned to point on patrols, the most dangerous position, the place given to soldiers who had proven they could think under pressure. 29 days later, a single rifle shot from a sniper hidden high in a palm tree ended his war. He was 22 years old. What remained was not just a destroyed bunker, but a lesson written into the ground at Fort McKinley. Firepower had failed. Courage alone had failed. The problem had only been solved when someone stopped trying to overpower the enemy and instead predicted what they would do next and built a mechanism that made every choice lethal. The men of Company A did not hold a ceremony when they passed the pillbox. They did not stop to mark the spot or speak his name. They kept moving, because in war, silence is the signal that matters. The silence meant they were alive. It meant the geometry that had been killing them all day was gone. 15 days after the fight, the Medal of Honor was approved. It moved faster than most paperwork in wartime because the evidence was undeniable. Measurements, maps, witness statements, photographs. Every step of Perez's movement had been reconstructed. Not to glorify him, but to prove that what he had done was real. The medal would never reach him. On March 14th, 1945, Perez walked point on a patrol near Santa Tomas. A Japanese sniper waited high in a coconut palm. One shot. Perez fell where he stood. No warning. No chance to react. The same logic he had used against the bunker was used against him. The first man dies first. A year later, his father received the medal on a bridge between two countries. American officers stood beside Mexican dignitaries. The citation was read aloud. 18 enemy soldiers killed while neutralizing a fortified position. The language was formal, restrained, incapable of capturing what had really happened in 4 minutes of decision-making under fire. What the citation did not say was that 160 men walked through that breach because one soldier understood something simple and brutal. Under pressure, humans do not act creatively. They act predictably. They run toward what feels familiar. Perez did not fight the bunker. He fought the behavior of the men inside it. The pillbox had been designed to stop courage. It was never designed to defeat a trap. The grenade was not the weapon. The tunnel was not the target. The real weapon was foresight applied without hesitation. Perez did not change the war. He changed an afternoon. But that afternoon determined who lived to see the next day. The men who walked past that silent bunker carried the proof with them, not in medals or speeches, but in the absence of gunfire. That is what his 4 minutes bought. Not glory, not survival, movement. Wars are usually remembered for massive offensives and famous generals. But most lives are decided in small places, by single decisions, made under pressure, with no audience. Fort McKinley was one of those places. A concrete bunker built to kill dozens was defeated not by superior firepower, but by a man who understood how fear moves people. Manuel Perez Jr. didn't overwhelm the enemy. He guided them. He forced them into a choice where every path ended the same way. 29 days later, the war took him the same way it takes so many others, quietly, without warning. A single shot from someone who had also learned where to wait and when to fire. What remains is not the medal, the schools, or the plaques. It is the moment when the guns went silent and 160 men stood up and walked forward instead of dying where they lay. The story of Manuel Perez Jr. is often told as an act of extraordinary courage, but courage alone does not explain what happened at Fort McKinley. Courage had already been spent that day. 12 men had charged that bunker with courage and never stood up again. Courage had crawled forward under machine gun fire, thrown grenades, dragged wounded men back through dirt and blood, and still the pillbox remained. What stopped the killing was not bravery, it was understanding. Perez did not see the bunker as an object to be destroyed. He saw it as a system operated by people. Concrete, steel, and guns only mattered because men were inside them, making decisions under pressure. Every defensive structure assumes one thing about human behavior: that attackers will try to break in from the front and defenders will hold their ground. Perez broke that assumption. He realized that no matter how disciplined soldiers are, fear compresses time and options. When a grenade lands at your feet, doctrine disappears. Instinct takes over. The trap worked because it did not rely on heroics or speed. It relied on prediction. Perez did not need to know who was inside the bunker, how brave they were, or how well trained. He only needed to know what people do when an enclosed space turns into a blast chamber. They run, and they run toward what they already know. The tunnel exit was not just an escape route. It was a habit formed long before that day. It was familiar. Familiarity becomes irresistible under stress. This is the uncomfortable truth of combat that training manuals rarely admit. Most lethal outcomes are not created by superior weapons, but by forcing predictable reactions. Perez did not defeat the Japanese soldiers by overpowering them. He defeated them by narrowing their choices until every option led through the same fatal space. The grenade was only the trigger. The real weapon was the tunnel. There is a broader lesson here about problem solving under extreme pressure. Every officer on that field saw the same bunker. They evaluated it through the lens of doctrine: suppress, flank, assault, repeat. Perez looked at it sideways. He asked a different question. Instead of asking how to kill the bunker, he asked how the men inside would try to survive. That shift in perspective turned an impossible tactical problem into a solvable one. This kind of thinking is rare, not because it is complex, but because it is emotionally difficult. When men around you are dying, the urge is to act louder, faster, harder. Perez did the opposite. He slowed down. He watched. He waited. That restraint is often mistaken for hesitation, but it was calculation. He understood that the battlefield punishes impatience more reliably than fear. The aftermath reinforces another harsh reality. The Army initially rejected his Silver Star recommendation because of quotas. Paperwork lagged behind reality. Institutions struggle to recognize actions that do not fit neat categories. Perez did not charge screaming into the bunker. He did not lead a squad. He did not follow a playbook. He solved a problem too cleanly for bureaucracy to process at first. Even his death follows the same logic that defined his life. He was killed because he was on point, because competent soldiers are put in the most dangerous position, because snipers aim for the first man. There is no moral symmetry here, no narrative justice. The same mechanics that allowed Perez to predict enemy behavior also allowed someone else to predict his. This is why the story matters beyond medals or memorials. It exposes the mechanical nature of survival and death in war. Meaning is not assigned by fate or fairness. It is generated by decisions, timing, and geometry. Perez bought time, space, and silence for 160 men. He did not change the war, but he changed who lived through that afternoon. That is how wars are actually decided, not by grand strategy alone, but by small moments where someone understands the system better than the people trapped inside it. The lesson is not that everyone should act like Perez. Very few situations allow for that kind of solution. The lesson is that problems that seem unsolvable often remain so because they are approached from the wrong angle. Perez did not add force. He removed assumptions. He recognized that fear creates funnels, and funnels can be weaponized. In the end, Fort McKinley did not fall because of superior American firepower. It fell because one man understood that under pressure, human behavior becomes predictable. And predictability, once mapped, can be turned into certainty. That is what 4 minutes of thinking bought. Not heroism in the abstract, but silence where there should have been more gunfire. And in war, silence is the clearest proof that something went right. There is another layer to Perez's action that is easy to miss if the focus stays on numbers and medals. What he demonstrated at Fort McKinley was not improvisation born of luck. It was the result of internalized discipline. His movements, reloads, timing, and restraint were not instinctive in the romantic sense. They were trained responses, executed deliberately. The freedom to think creatively in combat only exists when fundamentals are automatic. Perez could afford to observe because he trusted his body to perform under fire. The low crawl, the timing between bursts, the controlled shots against the 4 soldiers in the secondary trench, all of it points to a man who was not overwhelmed by the environment. This matters because true problem-solving under pressure does not come from inspiration. It comes from capacity. Without mastery of basics, creativity collapses into panic. This is a lesson that extends far beyond the battlefield. Systems fail when people confront problems that exceed their training. Perez did not rise to the occasion. He fell back on preparation so deeply ingrained that it freed his mind to see the situation clearly. Most people, in war or peace, are trapped by the immediate surface of a problem. They react to what is loud, visible, and urgent. Perez reacted to what was inevitable. The bunker was inevitable. The tunnel was inevitable. The human response was inevitable. Once those elements were recognized, the outcome became almost mechanical. That is, the uncomfortable part of the story. The killing was not chaotic. It was structured. Each man who exited the tunnel was not making an independent decision. He was following the same psychological path carved by stress, training, and fear. Perez did not need to hate them. He only needed to understand them. This strips war of its myths. It shows that survival often depends less on moral strength than on analytical clarity. That idea unsettles people because it suggests that outcomes are not always earned through virtue. They are often earned through positioning. The men inside the pillbox were not inferior fighters. They were trapped in a system that offered them no good choices. Perez did not outfight them. He outpositioned them. There is also a sobering lesson in how quickly such mastery is consumed by war itself. 29 days after his defining action, Perez was dead. No escalation. No dramatic buildup. Just a single shot from a sniper who understood his own geometry just as well. The battlefield does not reward consistency with longevity. It rewards it with temporary advantage. That advantage must be used immediately, because it expires without warning. This is why stories like Perez's should not be told as fairy tales of heroism. They should be told as case studies in applied thinking under extreme conditions. War does not ask who deserves to live longer. It asks who understands the situation faster. The same logic that saved 160 men did not save Perez. And that contradiction is not a flaw in the story. It is the truth of it. Even the Medal of Honor process reflects this reality. The institution needed diagrams, sworn statements, measurements, and reconstruction because the action itself defied narrative expectation. It did not look like valor as commonly imagined. There was no charge, no rallying cry, no unit maneuver. Just a man who identified leverage and applied it precisely. Bureaucracies struggle with that kind of action because it resists simplification. What ultimately endures is not the metal, but the pattern. Fort McKinley teaches that systems built to resist force are often vulnerable to understanding. Whether those systems are military, organizational, or psychological, the principle remains the same. Pressure reveals behavior. Behavior creates predictability. Predictability creates control. Perez did not invent this principle. He simply applied it without hesitation when others could not. And that is perhaps the most important lesson of all. Insight without action is useless. Many soldiers may have seen that tunnel. Only one acted on what it meant. That is why the silence after the gun stopped matters more than any citation. It marks the moment when analysis replaced attrition, when thought replaced momentum. In that silence, 160 men stood up and walked forward instead of becoming statistics. War rarely offers clean victories. But sometimes, for a few minutes, it reveals a rule so clearly that it cannot be ignored. At Fort McKinley, that rule was simple and unforgiving. The enemy does not have to be destroyed if they can be made to destroy themselves through their own reactions. Perez understood that. He acted on it. And for 4 minutes, the war bent to reason instead of chaos. There's a final, uncomfortable truth in Perez's story that most heroic narratives avoid. His success was not scalable. It could not be repeated on command. It could not be taught as a checklist. The trap worked because a rare alignment occurred. The terrain, the enemy's construction choices, the psychology of men under blast pressure, and a soldier capable of recognizing all of it in real time. Remove any one of those factors, and the outcome collapses. This matters because modern institutions prefer repeatable solutions. Doctrines are built around what works most of the time, not what works once with devastating effect. Perez's action sits outside doctrine not because it was reckless, but because it was context-dependent. War tolerates such solutions only briefly. Then it reverts to averages, probabilities, and attrition. And yet, those rare moments often decide everything locally. The destruction of that single pillbox accelerated an entire division's advance. It shortened a campaign measured in days. It removed future casualties that can never be counted. Strategy often hinges on tactical anomalies, outliers that break momentum. Perez was one of those anomalies. Another layer often ignored is moral distance. Perez did not personalize the enemy. He did not pause to reflect on nationality, ideology, or hatred. He treated the men inside the bunker as components of a system responding to stimuli. This emotional detachment is frequently misread as coldness, but it is often the only way complex decisions can be made under fire. Emotion narrows vision. Perez widened his. This does not make the killing easier in a human sense. It makes it survivable in a functional one. Soldiers who hesitate at the wrong moment die not because they are less moral, but because they allow the system to dictate terms. Perez reversed that relationship. He imposed structure on chaos. But this inversion carries a cost. Soldiers who think this way are often consumed faster. They are placed on point. They are relied upon disproportionately. They become the solution to problems that should never depend on one person. Perez's reassignment to point patrols was not punishment. It was recognition. And it was a death sentence, wearing the mask of trust. This exposes one of war's quiet cruelties. Competence attracts danger. The more reliable a soldier becomes, the more frequently he is placed where survival margins are thinnest. Perez survived Fort McKinley because he understood geometry. He died later because geometry does not care who deserves to live. The sniper who killed him did not know his name, did not know his medal was being processed, did not know what he had done weeks earlier. That anonymity is not tragic irony. It is the operating principle of war. Outcomes are disconnected from meaning. Recognition trails behind events, if it arrives at all. That is why the bridge ceremony matters symbolically but not functionally. The father standing between two countries, receiving a medal for a son already buried, represents closure for society, not for war. War closed Perez's account the moment that bullet struck. Everything afterward was bookkeeping. Yet, even stripped of sentiment, the lesson persists. Perez demonstrated that the most powerful force on a battlefield is not firepower, but constraint. When options are reduced, behavior becomes predictable. When behavior is predictable, control becomes possible. This principle applies wherever humans operate under stress. Combat, crisis response, leadership, even everyday conflict. Most people attempt to win by adding pressure. Perez won by redirecting it. He let fear do the work for him. He simply positioned himself where fear would send his enemies. That distinction matters. It reframes success not as domination, but as anticipation. Perez did not overpower the bunker. He outpaced its logic. He moved faster mentally than the situation was designed to allow. In the end, Fort McKinley offers no comforting moral. It offers clarity. War rewards those who see patterns early and act without hesitation. It punishes everyone else eventually, regardless of virtue. Perez's 4 minutes did not make him immortal. They made him effective. And effectiveness, not longevity, is the true currency of war. The silence that followed the bunker's fall was temporary. The war resumed its noise elsewhere. But for those men who walked through that breach, silence was enough. That is the final lesson. In a system built to consume lives, sometimes the highest achievement is not survival, but interruption. If there is any enduring value in Perez's action, it lies in how it exposes the difference between initiative and impulse. Many soldiers act quickly. Few act deliberately. Impulse responds to danger as it appears. Initiative anticipates danger before it fully reveals itself. Perez did not wait for another failed assault or another order. He recognized that time itself was the enemy. Every minute the bunker remained active meant more men would die trying to solve the problem the wrong way. This is where his decision becomes truly rare. Acting without orders in combat is usually punished, not rewarded. Armies are built on control because uncontrolled action multiplies risk. Perez crossed that line knowingly. He did so not out of defiance, but because he understood that the existing structure had reached its limit. When systems fail repeatedly, obedience becomes a form of participation in failure. That realization is dangerous, and it explains why very few people ever act on it. To step outside doctrine requires accepting full responsibility for the outcome. If Perez's plan had failed, he would not have been remembered as a hero who tried something new. He would have been remembered as a soldier who died alone, out of position, without authorization. The line between initiative and disaster is invisible until after the fact. This is why hindsight distorts stories like this. Once the trap works, it looks inevitable. It wasn't. Perez bet his life on an understanding of human behavior under extreme stress. He had no guarantee the tunnel would be used. No guarantee the grenade would force evacuation. No guarantee that men would emerge one by one instead of in a coordinated rush. His confidence was not certainty. It was acceptance of risk grounded in logic. And that is perhaps the most transferable lesson of all. Effective action rarely comes from eliminating uncertainty. It comes from choosing which uncertainty you are willing to accept. Perez chose to accept the uncertainty of individual action over the certainty of continued attrition. He traded a known, ongoing failure for a narrow chance at decisive success. The battlefield often rewards this kind of decision only briefly. Once enemies adapt, such opportunities vanish. Tunnels get covered. Exits get defended. Patterns get broken. Perez's solution worked once because it exploited assumptions that had not yet been punished. War evolves by eliminating predictability. That is why such moments feel singular and unrepeatable. Yet even as war adapts, the underlying truth remains unchanged. Human beings under stress seek simplicity. They narrow their world to the fastest path away from danger. Perez did not invent that behavior. He recognized it, before others were willing to rely on it. This is why his story resists moral packaging. It is neither uplifting nor tragic in a conventional sense. It is instructional. It shows how clarity can exist inside chaos, how logic can survive fear, and how decisive outcomes often come from removing options rather than creating them. Perez did not leave behind a doctrine. He left behind a pattern. Those patterns are not written into manuals because they depend on perception, timing, and courage of a specific kind. The courage to trust one's understanding more than one's orders when the situation demands it. In the end, war took Perez the same way it takes most soldiers: impersonally, efficiently, without ceremony. That does not negate what he did. It contextualizes it. His value was not measured in years survived, but in lives not lost during a single afternoon. The bunker at Fort McKinley is long gone. The concrete has weathered. The ground has changed. But the principle revealed there remains intact. Systems designed to kill can be defeated by those who understand how people behave inside them. Perez understood that for 4 minutes. That was enough. And that is where the story must end, not with triumph or tragedy, but with clarity. The temptation, when hearing a story like this, is to search for reassurance, to believe that intelligence will always prevail over force. That insight guarantees survival, that doing everything right leads to a just outcome. Perez's life offers no such comfort. What it offers instead is honesty. It shows that clarity can win a moment without winning the future, and that effectiveness does not negotiate with fate. Perez solved the problem in front of him completely. There was nothing left undone at Fort McKinley. No loose ends, no half measures, and still, the war reclaimed him weeks later without hesitation. This is not contradiction. It is consistency. War does not reward people. It consumes situations. That is why the value of his action must be measured precisely, not sentimentally. He did not create safety. He created a window, a brief interruption in a system designed to produce casualties. One opening where movement replaced stagnation, where men advanced instead of dying in place. That is as much as any individual can ever truly buy in war. Understanding this prevents the story from becoming myth. Myths promise meaning. Reality delivers function. Perez's function was decisive, temporary, and exact. He applied pressure where it mattered and disappeared from the equation shortly afterward. That does not diminish the act. It defines it. The world often misunderstands this kind of contribution because it leaves no ongoing trace. There is no doctrine stamped with his name, no tactic formally attributed to him, no school of thought that can be replicated on demand. What remains is an example, fragile, situational, and therefore easy to ignore. But examples are how understanding spreads in environments that resist theory. Soldiers remember moments, not manuals. The men who walked past that bunker carried a lesson that required no explanation. Problems that cannot be broken head-on must be turned. Fear is not chaos. Fear is structure. That lesson outlives medals and citations because it lives where decisions are made, not where stories are told. It lives in the pause before action, in the question that reframes a situation, in the willingness to abandon force in favor of inevitability. Perez did not defeat the enemy's strength. He defeated their assumptions. He did not fight faster. He thought earlier. And that distinction is the difference between attrition and resolution. Perez's legacy is therefore not inspirational in the usual sense. It is instructional. It teaches that even inside systems built to erase individuality, a single moment of understanding can still matter. Not forever, not universally, but exactly when it is needed. That is the harsh, precise truth his story leaves behind. And it is enough. At some point, every serious account of war reaches the same quiet conclusion. The battlefield does not care why something worked, only that it did. Fort McKinley does not remember Manuel Perez Jr. as a hero or a symbol. It remembers him as a temporary correction to a lethal equation. For a brief interval, the numbers changed. That is the hardest part for people outside the experience to accept. We want actions to echo. We want meaning to accumulate. War resists both. It reduces everything to immediate effect. Perez's effect was clean, decisive, and bounded in time. When that time ended, the system resumed its original function elsewhere. Yet within that limitation lies the true value of his story. It shows that even in environments governed by overwhelming force, there are moments where perception outruns momentum. Moments where understanding arrives just early enough to matter. These moments are rare not because they require genius, but because they demand a willingness to abandon familiar solutions when they stop working. Most people cling to failing methods longer than they should. They escalate effort instead of reassessing direction. Perez did the opposite. He recognized that the problem was not insufficient aggression, but incorrect framing. The bunker was not winning because it was strong. It was winning because it was being engaged on its own terms. That insight applies far beyond combat. Systems that appear unbeatable often depend on predictable responses. Once those responses change, strength becomes irrelevant. Perez did not attack power. He attacked dependency on the tunnel, on habit, on fear-driven escape. What followed was not chaos, but order. Every man who exited that tunnel behaved exactly as expected. The violence was terrible, but it was not random. It was structured by human limitation. That recognition is unsettling, but it is also clarifying. It removes illusion from the equation. By the time historians reconstruct these moments, the danger has already passed. They can analyze calmly, draw diagrams, extract principles. Perez had none of that distance. He acted inside the problem, accepting that clarity does not guarantee survival, only relevance. That distinction matters. Survival is personal. Relevance is situational. Perez achieved the latter perfectly. The former was never promised. In the end, Fort McKinley offers no redemption arc. It offers a case study in how wars are actually moved forward, not by speeches or ideals, but by interruptions. Brief disruptions where someone sees the structure beneath the noise and acts before it reasserts itself. Those disruptions are fragile. They cannot be planned for. They cannot be mass-produced. But when they occur, they decide who walks away and who does not. Perez created one such disruption, 4 minutes long, precise, final. After that, the war continued as wars always do. That is not tragedy. That is accuracy. Perhaps the most sobering realization in all of this is how ordinary the moment was when it ended. There was no sense that history had shifted, no immediate recognition that something exceptional had occurred. Men simply advanced, checked sectors, redistributed ammunition, and prepared for the next contact. War absorbs even its most precise moments without pause. This is important because it reminds us that meaning is almost never experienced in real time. Perez did not act knowing he would later be studied, cited, or remembered. He acted because the situation demanded resolution, and because he understood that waiting would only produce more dead men in the same places. His decision was not philosophical. It was practical. That practicality is what separates real effectiveness from symbolic heroism. Symbols exist to be remembered. Effectiveness exists to end a problem. Perez ended one problem completely. He left no loose variables behind. When the bunker fell silent, it stayed silent. And yet, war does not reward closure with mercy. The system simply moves on to the next friction point, the next exposed patrol, the next man walking point because someone must. Perez became that man again, not because he was reckless, but because competence creates dependency. Others trusted him to be where danger was highest. Trust, in war, is often indistinguishable from exposure. There is no lesson here about fairness. There is only a lesson about reality. Wars are not narratives with arcs. They are sequences of problems. Some are solved well, some are solved badly. Most are solved with unnecessary cost. Perez's action stands out because it solved a problem cleanly, without spillover, without escalation, without prolongation. That cleanliness is rare. It is also fleeting. Systems correct themselves quickly. Opportunities close. Terrain changes. Enemies learn. The window that Perez exploited existed only once. That does not make it less valuable. It makes it more exact. When people look for inspiration in stories like this, they often look in the wrong place. The inspiration is not in the violence, the kill count, or the metal. It is in the discipline to pause when everyone else is rushing, to observe when others are reacting, and to act only when understanding has reached a threshold where hesitation becomes the greater risk. Perez crossed that threshold. He did not know the outcome. He accepted the cost. That acceptance, not the result, is the defining feature of his action. In the end, Fort McKinley teaches nothing about glory. It teaches something far less comfortable and far more useful, that even in the most constrained environments imaginable, there are moments where insight briefly outruns force. When that happens, the responsibility to act falls entirely on the individual who sees it first. That is not a moral. That is the record.